Hey, Arbenay here, and it's been a minute, but I am back and I want to share some new content with you in relation to, of course, tithing as well as the prosperity gospel. Now, I came across this article and I wanted to share it with you because it actually does address a particular issue that I wanted to talk about. Now, you can read the title here, all right? What this pastor has been charged with and his crimes, right? Now, you see this title, you may ask yourself, now, what does that have to do with tithing? What does that have to, what does that have to, what's the relationship between this and tithing? So that's what I'm going to get into. So, first of all, I want to say that, one of the reasons some people, some Christians give for not tithing is that they really don't trust what the pastor or the church is going to do with the money. They don't trust the pastors with their money. They don't want their money being used to support lavish lifestyles, fancy cars and big houses and this, that, and the other. And there are other Christians who have a counter argument to that. And what they say is, well, you really shouldn't be concerned with how the pastor or the church is using the tithes. Don't worry about it. That's really none of your business. Your duty and your responsibility as a Christian is to just pay your tithes. And if a pastor or church doesn't do right by the money, well, then let God handle that. Let God handle any poor financial stewardship on their part, and you just keep paying your tithes. Now, personally, I don't necessarily agree with that argument. That you should just, first of all, I don't support the concept of tithing anyway, but if a person is tithing, I don't agree with the fact that you should not be concerned or have any issues with what a pastor may or may not do with the tithes, that your responsibility is just to pay the tithes and not ask any questions. And so that really brings me to back into this particular article here, because again, you see that this pastor was engaged in highly inappropriate, perverted activity. And what was brought out in this article, there were a couple women who were interviewed for this article, and they attended this man's church. And this is in Ohio. And these women, I think it was a woman and her aunt, and you can see it here, is that they were regular tithe payers, okay? And combined, they paid like $450 a month in tithes. And over the course of about 2.5 years, they had paid about $10,000 in tithes. And that's a lot of money for most people, okay? But what was interesting to me in this article is that one of the women said that if they had known what this pastor had been doing, because he had inappropriate relationships. I can't even call it relationships, but he engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior with teenagers and underage teens in the congregation. And on top, and in addition, this pastor wasn't even paying the bills. The church he kept moving the congregation from one church building to another because he just wasn't paying the bills. So they're paying their tithes, and he's not paying the bills. They're paying their tithes, and he is engaged in all this other highly perverted, inappropriate behavior with the young people in the congregation. In this article, it even says that he had inappropriate relations with a child that was under 13 years old. But what again? So the point is, one of the women said, had they known that this is what this man was up to, there's no way they would have paid tithes to this church if they knew that this man was so corrupt and corrupted in such a way. And that's very telling, because you have pastors at these churches who are engaged in this type of activity, and other, whether it's having inappropriate relations with um, people in the congregation, whether it's men, women, boys, and girls, whomever, and or you have situations where pastors are just not being good financial stewards, and they're kind of just fleecing the flock for their own benefit, and people will still sit in that church Sunday after Sunday paying their hard-earned money in these tithes. And the whole point in this is to point out that at what point do people being the congregation, hold these pastors and these churches accountable for what they're doing with the tithes? So that's why I don't agree with the argument at the beginning, that I mentioned at the beginning, that some Christians hold this belief that don't worry about, what a pastor may or may not do with the money. You just pay your tithes. I No, it doesn't work that way. Because when you do that, what you're saying is, if you have that type of mindset, you're saying that pastors and churches are not cannot be held accountable for their actions. You know what I'm saying? That the point is, if you are a tither, or even if you give voluntarily according to the Spirit, give voluntarily to a church, you are a member of that church, and you have every right to hold these pastors and these churches accountable. You have every right to demand accountability. And if you find out that your pastor is engaged in this type of activity, inappropriate activity with the members, if you find out that the pastor is not paying the bills, is mismanaging the tithes and the offerings, you don't have to sit there and keep putting money into that institution, into that church. You're not obligated to keep paying tithes or giving your money. And that's kind of like, again, that's what the woman said. It's like, had we known that this is what was going on, there's no way we would have supported this man, supported this pastor. There's no way they would have supported this church. And I think more Christians need to have that type of attitude and be willing to walk away, or at least withdraw funds from, a church or pastor that is just misbehaving in the worst way. So, as a Christian, especially if you're putting your hard-earned money into that church every Sunday, you need to ask yourself, what is your money supporting? What is your tithes supporting? What are your offerings really supporting? And you should demand accountability. So that's what I wanted to share with you in this video, and I will leave a link to this article in the description below if you want to read it yourself. But what do you think? Do you think people should just go ahead and keep paying tithes and paying their offerings, or keep giving financially to a church and not expect or demand accountability from a pastor or the church itself? Do you think you should keep giving, and then just let God handle the situation? So that's something to think about. I'm just posing that and throwing that out there. So that's pretty much it, and I'm going to close this video out, and thank you for watching. Peace and blessings.